The serial killer comes close to admitting multiple murders in a newly released video of a police interrogation, but Pickton stopped short of a complete confession.
Convicted BC serial killer Robert Pickton.
Most notorious serial killers.
Robert Pickton.
On the outskirts of Vancouver, where the city fades into farmland and gravel roads, there was a property that locals talked about in uneasy tones. It looked chaotic even from the road. Old vehicles rusting in the grass, broken machinery scattered everywhere, buildings leaning and collapsing into the mud. And behind it all were pig pens, lots of them. People who drove by sometimes joked about the place, but others didn't laugh, because by the late 1990s, something strange was happening in the city. Women were disappearing, one after another. Most of them came from the same neighborhood. Most of them were never found. For years, those disappearances remained a mystery, until investigators finally walked onto that farm and uncovered a story so disturbing that it would become one of the darkest criminal cases in Canadian history. At the center of it all was a quiet pig farmer named Robert Pickton. Robert Pickton was born on October 24, 1949, in Port Coquitlam. He grew up on a pig farm owned by his parents, Leonard and Louise Pickton. The farm was not a pleasant place to grow up. Visitors and relatives later described it as filthy, neglected, and chaotic. Animals wandered through mud and waste. Machinery sat broken for years. Buildings were falling apart. Pickton's mother reportedly cared deeply about the pigs, but far less about the children. Robert and his siblings were often left to fend for themselves. School was difficult for him. Former classmates later said he often arrived dirty and smelling strongly of livestock. He was bullied frequently. Many people described him as socially awkward and withdrawn. Eventually, he dropped out of school and began working on the farm full-time. At that point, nothing about him suggested the horrific crimes he would later be accused of committing. But the isolation of the farm would become an important part of the story. After the death of their parents, Robert and his brother inherited the property. Over time, the farm changed. It stopped being just a pig farm. It became a gathering place. Parties were held there frequently. Hundreds of people sometimes showed up. There was music, alcohol, drugs, and strangers coming and going at all hours. The brothers even created something called the Piggy Palace Good Time Society, which they claimed was a charity organization. In reality, it functioned mostly as a place for large parties. Motorcycle gang members, drug users, and people from across the Vancouver area visited the property. Police were called to the farm many times over the years, usually for noise complaints or disturbances, but nothing that seemed to suggest a massive criminal operation, at least not yet. Many of the women who would later be linked to Pickton came from a neighborhood called Downtown East Side. At the time, it was one of the most economically disadvantaged areas in Canada. Poverty was widespread. Drug addiction affected many residents. Sex work was common as a means of survival, and when women disappeared from this area, their cases often did not receive the same level of urgency as others. Throughout the 1990s, more and more women vanished. Families reported their daughters, sisters, and friends missing. Community advocates warned that something was terribly wrong. Some believed a serial killer was targeting vulnerable women, but the warnings did not immediately lead to a major investigation. For years, the disappearances continued. Looking back, the pattern seems obvious. Many missing women were sex workers, struggling with addiction, living in downtown East Side, last seen getting into vehicles with unknown men. But at the time, these cases were handled by different police departments. Information was not always shared properly. This lack of coordination allowed the disappearances to remain unsolved far longer than they should have, and during those years, the suspected killings continued. Investigators later concluded that Pickton often approached women in Vancouver. He offered money, drugs, or a place to party. Sometimes he promised work on the farm. For people struggling to survive, these offers could be difficult to refuse. Once the women arrived at the property, many were never seen again. Witnesses later described how isolated the farm was. Screams or violence would likely go unheard. The pigs themselves also played a role in what investigators later uncovered, because pigs can consume nearly anything. Evidence presented in court suggested Pickton murdered numerous women over many years. Methods varied according to investigators and testimony, but what happened afterward was particularly disturbing. Some remains were allegedly fed to pigs. Others were buried or burned on the property. Investigators later discovered DNA evidence belonging to many victims across the farm. The full truth may never be known, but what authorities uncovered suggested a level of brutality that shocked the entire country. The confirmed number will likely never be fully known. Here are the major figures connected to the case. Convicted murders, 6. Charged murders, 26. NA evidence linked to over 30 women. Alleged confession to undercover officer, 49 victims. During conversations with an undercover police officer, Pickton reportedly said he had planned to reach 50 victims but was arrested before he could. If accurate, that statement would make him one of the most prolific serial killers in modern history. The women who were officially part of the first trial included Serena Abbotsway, Mona Wilson, Andrea Josbury, Brenda Wolfe, Marnie Frey, Georgina Papin. Each of them had families, friends, stories that went far beyond the headlines. For years, their families pushed authorities to investigate their disappearances more seriously. Many of them attended court every day during the trial, holding photographs, demanding justice. One of the most chilling moments in the entire story happened in 1997. A woman was brought to Pickton's property. At some point, he attacked her. She fought back. The struggle was violent. Both of them were injured, but she managed to escape. Police responded and arrested Pickton. However, the case eventually collapsed. Charges were dropped. Years later, investigators would look back on this incident as one of the biggest missed opportunities to stop the killings earlier. If the case had moved forward, dozens of lives might have been saved. As the number of missing women grew, rumors began circulating in Vancouver. People in the downtown east side started sharing stories. Some mentioned the pig farm. Others described women being seen entering vehicles and never returning. Community activists held marches and protests. They demanded more attention to the disappearances, but it took years before a large coordinated investigation began. By the early 2000s, pressure on police had increased significantly. Media coverage expanded. Families demanded answers. Authorities eventually formed a task force to investigate the missing women. This operation involved multiple police agencies working together. For the first time, investigators began connecting the cases in a serious way. And once again, tips pointed toward the Pickton farm. Ironically, Pickton was not initially arrested for murder. Police were investigating illegal firearms. In February 2002, officers executed a search warrant on the property. What they discovered quickly changed everything. Personal belongings belonging to missing women, identification cards, clothing, and eventually human remains. The farm instantly became one of the largest crime scenes in Canadian history. On February 22, 2002, police arrested Robert Pickton. At first, he faced a small number of charges, but as the investigation continued, more were added. Eventually, he was charged with the murders of 26 women. The case quickly became international news. People across Canada wanted to understand how such a crime could continue for so many years without being stopped. While awaiting trial, police conducted an undercover operation. An officer posed as a fellow inmate. Over time, Pickton began speaking freely. During these conversations, he allegedly confessed to killing dozens of women. He reportedly said he had killed 49 victims and that he had hoped to reach 50. These statements became some of the most chilling details of the investigation. Because the case was so massive, prosecutors divided the charges. The first trial focused on 6 victims. It began in 2006 and lasted nearly a year. The jury heard testimony from investigators, forensic experts, and witnesses who had visited the farm. The evidence included DNA findings, personal belongings, and statements Pickton had made. In December 2007, the verdict was announced: guilty. 6 counts of second-degree murder. He received life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. The remaining charges were later stayed. Prosecutors argued that another trial would not change the outcome and would put families through additional trauma. The case sparked outrage across Canada. Many people believed the disappearances should have been investigated much earlier. Advocates for marginalized communities argued that systemic bias played a role. The victims were often poor, Indigenous, or involved in sex work. Critics said these factors led to slower responses from authorities. The case forced the country to confront uncomfortable questions. In response to public anger, the government launched a formal inquiry. The investigation examined how police handled the missing women cases. The results were deeply troubling. The inquiry concluded that police agencies failed to share information effectively. Warnings from the community were not taken seriously enough. Vulnerable women were not adequately protected. The case became a major turning point for policing policies in Canada. And after the inquiry, several reforms were introduced. These included better coordination between police forces, improved systems for tracking missing persons, more attention to cases involving vulnerable communities. While these changes were important, many families believed they came far too late. Following his conviction, Pickton was placed in a federal prison. For years, he remained mostly out of public view. Occasionally, news stories revisited the case. Books and documentaries explored what happened on the farm. But for the families of the victims, the story never truly ended. The loss remained. In 2024, news emerged that Pickton had been attacked by another inmate in prison. He suffered severe injuries. Shortly afterward, he died. The reaction across Canada was mixed. Some felt justice had finally caught up with him. Others believed he should have lived out his sentence behind bars. For the families of victims, his death did not bring closure, because many questions remain unanswered. The story of Robert Pickton is not just about one man. It is about a system that ignored warning signs, a community that tried to speak out, families who fought for years to be heard, and dozens of women whose lives mattered long before the investigation finally began. Today, the case remains one of the darkest chapters in Canadian criminal history, and a reminder of what can happen when vulnerable people are overlooked,